From the outside, a lake appears identical everywhere: water, shore, and reeds. However, internally, these represent entirely different worlds. There are regions where fish are virtually non-existent, and there are specific locations where they gather in high densities. Today, we will determine how to locate them without using a fish finder, a boat, or advice from local anglers. We will analyze the lake from the inside, discussing how the bottom is structured, why fish are not distributed evenly, which spots work throughout the year, and how to interpret the water surface to understand what is happening in the depths. We will cover the shoreline, shallows, drop-offs, islands, points, holes, inflows, and outflows. I will explain how fish holding areas shift depending on the season and what to look for when arriving at an unfamiliar body of water for the first time. All of this is done without complex devices, just observation, logic, and an understanding of fish behavior. If you have ever arrived at a lake and didn't know where to cast, this video is specifically for you. Imagine arriving in an unfamiliar city and wanting to eat. You wouldn't walk randomly down every single street. You would go where there are cafes, signs, the smell of food, or a line at the entrance. Fish behave the exact same way. They do not distribute themselves evenly across the lake. They are always located where three things exist simultaneously: food, oxygen, and cover. Sabaneyev wrote about this in the 19th century, and since then, nothing has fundamentally changed. A fish is an economical creature. It does not want to waste energy searching for food where none exists. Therefore, it stays in specific spots and returns to them repeatedly. What constitutes food in a lake? It is fry, invertebrates, larvae, and algae. All of this is concentrated in specific zones: shallows with aquatic vegetation, the coastal zone with snags, or the mouth of a stream. Where there is a food base, there are fish. Oxygen in a lake is not just water. In the summer, the surface layer warms up and becomes less saturated with oxygen than the deeper layers. In winter, under the ice, oxygen is generally in short supply, and fish seek places with an influx of it: springs, inflowing streams, or open areas near the reeds. Understanding this immediately explains why there are fish in one part of the lake, but 20 meters away, there are none. Cover is what allows fish to feel safe. A snag on the bottom, an overhanging bush above the water, or the edge of the weeds where shade provides coolness. All of these are points of attraction. Let me know in the comments if you have your own secret spot on a lake that works year after year. It would be interesting to compare what exactly is there. When you understand these three principles, the lake stops being random. You start looking at it like a map where some zones are highlighted, while others are gray and empty. There is another point that is often overlooked. Different species of fish prioritize things differently. Crucian carp will sit in a weedy shallow bay, even with minimal oxygen, as they are adapted to this. A pike will choose an ambush spot on the edge of the weeds, where it can attack in a single strike. Bream will move to the drop-off, where the bottom sharply changes depth. Therefore, reading a lake means understanding not only where the food and oxygen are, but also what kind of fish you are targeting. The first thing you see when you arrive at a lake is the shore. Most fishermen look at it and think, well, it's just a shore. But an experienced person looks and already sees at least 3 or 4 promising spots. Let's start with the reeds and rushes. This is not just decoration. Thickets of coastal vegetation provide both cover and a food base. Larvae live there, fry hide there, and there is shade on a hot day. Pike love to hold on the edge of the reeds. On one side is cover, on the other, open water for an attack. Perch stays slightly deeper than that same edge. Tench and crucian carp actually go right into the thickets and feed there. But what matters is not the vegetation itself, but its edge. Exactly where the weeds end and open water begins, that's where the ambush is. This is a classic spot for a predator at any time of the year. I remember once fishing on a small lake. I tried several spots along the clear water and caught nothing. I shifted literally 5 meters to the edge of the reeds and immediately got my first bite. The fish were holding exactly there. Now for snags, submerged trees, trunks that have fallen into the water, and roots near the shore. All of this works. Crayfish live here, small fish hide here, and it's cover for predators. An underwater snag is, in essence, a small reef. The larger the pileup, the higher the probability that something serious is holding there. The only problem is snags, but that's a matter of tackle, not location scouting. An undercut bank is a separate story, where the current or waves have washed away the soil for years. An overhang forms above the water. Underneath it is shade, coolness, and insects and worms that have fallen into the water. Chubb and ID literally patrol under such banks in the summer heat. Sabaneyev specifically noted this spot. According to his observations, an undercut bank with overhanging tree roots almost always yields a bite, as long as you don't make noise when approaching. Finally, the shore is not uniform in its terrain. Where it forms a small point or projection, there is water on both sides. The feeding zone is wider. Fish approach from different directions. Where the shore forms a cove or a bay, the water is calmer, there are fewer waves and more silt and plankton. These are feeding grounds for peaceful fish like bream, crucian carp, and roach. I should separately mention what an empty shore looks like. A straight line, no projections, a sandy bottom sloping into the water at the exact same angle. This is the most boring place on the lake. There is no variety here, no cover, no changes in depth. Fish pass through such areas in transit, but do not linger. If the shore looks monotonous for 100 meters, there is most likely no point in fishing there. Look for irregularities, a bend, a projection, a fallen tree, or a bush jutting into the water. Any break in the uniformity of the shore is a reason to stop and check it out. And one last thing about the coastal zone, don't forget to look at the opposite shore. If you are standing by a gently sloping, overgrown shore, and opposite is a steep clay cliff, then the depth starts immediately at that shore. It's worth casting over there. A steep bank almost always means a sharp drop-off. And a sharp drop-off, as we will discuss a bit later, is one of the most reliable landmarks. If I had to name the single most important spot on any lake, I would name the drop-off. It is the boundary between the shallows and the deep, the place where the bottom sharply drops down. This is exactly where the majority of the fish concentrate during most seasons. This is the exact spot that most beginner fishermen miss because they don't know how to find it. What are the shallows? It's the coastal zone with relatively shallow depth, usually from half a meter to 2 to 3 meters. Here, weeds grow, the water warms up, and fry feed. In the summer, this is a feeding table for crucian carp, and tench. They literally graze in the shallows in search of food. But predators rarely hold in the shallows. It's too shallow and too open. However, on the edge of the shallows, on the drop-off, literally everything holds. Bream stay right on the slope and slightly below. Pike set up ambushes on the drop-off and attack upwards into the shallows where the fry come out to feed. Zander and perch also gravitate toward this zone. The drop-off is the boundary between two worlds, and fish know how to use it. How do you find a drop-off without a fish finder? The first method is tactile. You take a weight, cast it, and slowly drag it along the bottom, counting the seconds. As long as the sinker moves smoothly, it's the shallows. As soon as it drops and the line starts going down more sharply, there it is, the drop-off. You need to remember the direction and distance, put a marker on the line, or memorize a landmark on the shore. The second method is visual. Look at the color of the water. Greenish or brownish, murky water is usually the shallows. Darker, almost blue or gray water is a sign of depth. The boundary between them is often visible from the shore on a clear day with side lighting, in the morning or evening. The third method is the shoreline terrain. If the shore is gentle and slopes into the water smoothly, then the shallows will be long. If the shore sharply drops off, the drop-off is close to the shore. This simple rule works on most bodies of water. It's important to understand that a drop-off is not a straight line. It bends, breaks, and forms projections and pockets. Places where the drop-off makes a bend are especially promising. Fish concentrate there even more because it's more comfortable to hold in the bend without wasting energy on maintaining position. Another point that is often underestimated is underwater elevations in the shallows. These are so-called humps or banks, small hills on the bottom that rise toward the surface. They are hard to find without a fish finder, but sometimes they give themselves away. The grass grows a bit thicker, or the water is slightly lighter. On such elevations, perch and zander love to hold. They attack prey from the top down, and the elevation gives them a tactical advantage. Let me know in the comments if you have ever specifically fished on a drop-off, found it by accident, or looked for it on purpose. This is a very telling story about how the understanding of a body of water changes with experience. Islands, points, and underwater sandbars are what I call natural fish concentrators. They work on the same principle. They break the uniformity of the lake and create a variety of conditions in a small area. Let's start with islands. An island in a lake is, first of all, two drop-offs on one side and the other, plus usually a more complex bottom terrain around it. In addition, islands often provide shade, coastal vegetation, and cover. If there is an island on the lake, checking for fish around it is a mandatory routine. The side of it that faces the main open water is especially promising. It's usually deeper there, and the wind blows food in. Points are projections of the shore that jut into the lake. On both sides of the point, small bays form, places with calmer water. From both sides of the point, feeding currents converge. Predators often hold right at the tip of the point or slightly deeper. It's convenient there to patrol both flanks. I once spent half a day methodically fishing one shore with no results. A local man walked up, looked silently, and pointed his finger at a point 200 meters away. There, I caught 3 pike in an hour. Nothing magical, just knowing the spot. Underwater sandbars are an extension of a point underwater. The shore ends, but the ridge continues under the surface for another dozens of meters. You can find it with the same marker weight or by a characteristic change in watercolor. A sandbar often turns out to be an excellent spot for zander and perch. They hold along its edge and attack in different directions. The general rule for all these places: the more complex the terrain, the more interesting the spot. The lake shouldn't look boring around the point where you plan to fish. There is another type of structure that is often ignored: old pilings, submerged buildings, or remains of footbridges. On some lakes, especially where villages or farms used to stand, the bottom keeps traces of the past. Old pilings are in essence artificial snags. Aquatic life attaches to them. Around them, their own little world forms. If you know that your lake has such spots, they almost always yield results. A hole in a lake is a permanent address for many species of fish. Unlike a river, where there are many holes and they change depending on the water level, in a lake, a hole is an almost unchanging structure. It formed thousands of years ago during the formation of the body of water and stays in its place. In winter, a hole is a wintering spot. Large bream, carp, tench, and catfish all move to the depths when the temperature drops and the oxygen levels in the surface layers deteriorate. At the deepest point of the lake, the fish winter, practically without moving. In the summer, things are a bit more complicated. In extreme heat, the surface layer overheats, and the fish go deeper, to where the water's colder. But a hole in the middle of summer might not be the best place. There is less oxygen, no food, and the fish hold passively. The best place in the summer is the edges of the hole, its slopes, and the upper drop-off. That is exactly where the fish are active. Cold springs are a special story. Where springs bubble up on the bottom of the lake, the water temperature is lower and there is more oxygen. Fish feel this. In a hot summer, places with springs become concentration points. How do you find such a place? Sometimes it's visible by the ripples on the water in calm weather. The water coming up from the bottom slightly disturbs the surface. Sometimes it is indicated by a locally darker watercolor, which is slightly colder there and behaves differently. Sabané have pointed out that in bodies of water where there are springs, fish concentrate near them during periods of temperature extremes, both in extreme heat and in severe frosts. This observation is still relevant today. If local fishermen tell you there's a spring bubbling there, that is a spot you need to check first. One practical tip for finding holes without a fish finder: use a marker weight or just a heavy sinker with a long leader. Cast it, count the seconds until it touches the bottom during a steady descent, and do this in a fan pattern across the entire area. Where the count sharply increases, there is depth. It takes a long time, but it's accurate. This is exactly how people looked for fish before the advent of all modern electronics. And they found them. Old school bream fishermen knew every hole in their body of water by heart from memory without a single device. Now let's talk about what many take for granted but actually underestimate. The place where a stream or river flows into a lake is one of the most reliable spots on the entire body of water. Why? First, the inflow brings food, earthworms, insects that have fallen into the water, and small invertebrates. All of this floats with the current straight into the lake. Fish know this and hold at the entrance, catching what the water has brought. Second, the water in the inflow is usually cooler and more oxygen-rich than the stagnant lake water. In the summer, this is especially noticeable. The point of inflow often has a more complex terrain, an alluvial cone of sediments, a localized depression, or a change in the composition of the bottom. This in itself is already structure. Plus, the coastal vegetation near the stream, which overhangs the water, feeds the fish additionally. In the spring, the inflow has a special place. The first fish that start moving actively after winter go to the inflows. The water there is cleaner, and the temperature is slightly higher than in the main body of water because a shallow inflow warms up faster. Asp, chub, and roach. They are the first to appear right there. The outflow, the place where water leaves the lake, works on a similar logic, just slightly differently. The current pulls food out of the lake, and predators use this. At the source of a river from a lake, pike or zander are often on patrol. The exit into the river creates something like a funnel through which fry pass. If the lake is flowing with an inflow and an outflow, be sure to check both places. These are not just two good spots. They are the two poles of the lake, each with its own logic, and together they give an understanding of how the entire body of water works as a whole. And one more point worth noting, not all inflows are equally useful. A small drying stream that carries water only during the spring flood no longer works as an attractor in the summer. But a constant inflow, even a small one, works year-round. Therefore, when first getting to know a body of water, it's worth finding out if it has constant sources of water inflow, and if so, where they are located. This will give you a ready starting point without any bottom sounding. And lastly, how to read the water's surface. This is what works right now in real time, while you are standing on the shore and choosing where to cast. Fry are the main clue. Where the surface of the water is covered with small ripples, where splashes of fry are visible, there is a predator. This is not a hypothesis. This is a direct observation. The fry are panicking because they are being chased. They are being chased by perch, pike, or asp. If you see a commotion on the water, cast there immediately without thinking. You have seconds while the feeding frenzy continues. Birds are another free fish finder. Gulls, terns, and kingfishers. They hunt where there are fish. If gulls are circling over some part of the lake and periodically diving, there is a feeding frenzy. A predator has pushed the fry to the surface and is chasing them. Birds see this from above better than we do. Wind on a lake works in an interesting way. The windward side, the one where the wind is blowing, accumulates plankton on the shore, small aquatic life, and everything that was blown and brought in from the surface. Following the plankton come the fry, and following the fry comes the predator. This means that in windy weather, it's worth checking the windward shore specifically, rather than hiding behind trees on the sheltered side, as most people do. Duckweed and foam. Where the wind drives duckweed into a corner or foam accumulates near the shore. From the waves is also an interesting spot. Under the duckweed, there is less light, more shade, and small fish hide. Tench and crucian carp love this. Finally, oil slicks on the water. If you see a characteristic rainbow film on the surface, these are gases from the bottom, meaning there is organic matter, decomposing silt, little oxygen, and no fish there. Bypass such places. Let me know in the comments if you have ever noticed a fish feeding frenzy on a lake and managed to get in on it. This is one of the most exciting moments in fishing, when everything happens right before your eyes, and you just need to not get confused and cast exactly into the right spot. Everything we have covered, the shoreline, drop-offs, holes, inflows, and the water surface, these are not permanent answers. These are constant questions that need to be asked anew in every season, because fish in a lake do not stay in one place year-round. They move along with the temperature, oxygen, and food base. In the spring, right after the ice melts, the fish are hungry and active. They come out into the shallows where the water warms up faster. Coastal shallows, small bays with a dark bottom, and quiet coves. All of these are spots for spring fishing. Predators come to the shore along with the fry, which also head for the warmth. April and early May on most lakes in the middle latitudes is the time for fishing in the shallows. In the summer, the picture changes. The heat drives the fish to the depths during the hottest part of the day, from noon to evening. In the morning and evening, they come out to the shallows again. This is a daily rhythm that works consistently. In the summer, focus on the time of day. Dawn and the hour before sunset, the shallows and the edge of the reeds. Noon, look for the drop-off and the hole. In the fall, the fish become active again. The water cools down, and the oxygen levels even out. Predators feed heavily before winter. September and October are some of the best months on the lake. The fish go slightly deeper than in the summer, but not yet to wintering grounds. The drop-off in the fall works perhaps better than at any other time. Winter is a separate topic. Ice fishing follows its own laws. First ice. The fish are still active and hold in their usual summer spots. Midwinter. They retreat to the holes. The bite is minimal. Last ice. Activity again. The fish move toward the inflows and the edges of the body of water. Understanding this cycle is the true reading of a lake. Not just knowing where the drop-off is, but knowing when the fish are on the drop-off and when they are not there. And here is a question for you lastly before the finale. What time of year do you consider lake fishing to be the best? Let me know in the comments. I'm curious what everyone's favorite season is and why. The answers can be very unexpected. Here is what people learn over years. Not to cast farther than others, not to buy more expensive tackle, but simply to look at the water differently. An experienced fisherman arriving at an unfamiliar lake for the first 20 minutes does not take out his fishing rod. He walks along the shore and looks at where the reeds transition into open water, where the shore makes a projection, where the water color changes, where gulls fly low over the surface, and where a stream flows in. Only after this does he choose a spot, and, as a rule, he is not mistaken. This is exactly what reading a lake is. Not magic, not luck. Just attentiveness, plus knowledge of a few principles that we have covered today. I will briefly remind you of the main points. Fish are always where there is food, oxygen, and cover. The shoreline is the first thing you need to walk along. The drop-off is the boundary between the shallows and the deep, one of the most reliable spots on any lake. Islands, points, and sandbars gather fish from different directions. Holes work in the cold season and in the heat. Inflows and outflows are constant landmarks year-round. The water's surface tells you about what is happening in the depths. You just need to know how to listen. And all of this changes with the season. If the information was useful, I would appreciate your support. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to the channel. Ahead is a breakdown of the burbot, one of the most mysterious predators of our lakes, and a big video about the chub. Tight lines. See you by the water. If this exploration of the lake's hidden architecture has changed the way you look at the water's surface, please subscribe and like the channel. We are uncovering the secrets that nature keeps hidden beneath the depths. Cast your line into the future. The next great discovery will be surfacing very soon.